In 2003, in response to the growth of Islamist terrorism, the UK government embarked on a pretty revolutionary new response, which they called Prevent. The idea was that we should try to prevent Islamist ideas, ideologies from taking root. And the purpose was to try to kind of nip the problem early on in the bud. Now at the time, everybody agreed with this because it sounds like a very obvious thing to do, and prevention is better than cure, and who could possibly disagree with the idea of trying to stop something bad from happening. But the problem is this: once the government starts getting involved in questions of philosophy and ideology that are not necessarily violent, all sorts of problems break out. And the result has been, I think, that for a lot of young Muslims, they feel like they can't really speak their mind, they can't really express themselves fully as the same as other British citizens, for fear that they might be somehow coming under suspicion. That if they speak out angrily about, for example, foreign policy issues or government policy decisions, that they might somehow come under suspicion from the government that maybe they're on the pathway to terrorism. And this is a very, very dangerous thing indeed. And it's not intentional. I don't think the government wants that to happen. But the truth is that once you start getting into this mindset of trying to prevent something before it actually takes place, the result is often self-censorship, people silencing themselves, and that is so detrimental to the health of a democracy, because all that happens is those ideas are pushed underground somewhere else, or people tend to not even be willing to get involved in political discussions, and then what's the point of living in a democracy? Here's the bigger risk though. The whole architecture of Prevent and the general counter-terrorism laws that we have put in place over the last decade or so have a tendency to always grow. Governments always want to keep their citizens safe, that's their primary duty. And as a result, what always happens every time there's a terrorist attack or an increased threat from terrorism, the policy starts getting bigger. It creeps and creeps and creeps. And over the last decade, that is what we've seen. In 2003, Prevent started essentially as a relatively small thing to try to find people who were interested in violent action and convince them not to do it. Very narrow. But it grew over the years, so we're now at the point where every single public institution has a statutory duty to monitor people who might be at risk of extremism or terrorism. And no one seems to have noticed how much bigger this has become, but that is how government policies always work. They grow in tiny, often almost invisible steps. And this is what really bothers me about that. In the next 10 years or so, I can imagine that the types of extremism that we see in society changes quite dramatically. We have built up this legal architecture really designed to stop violent Islamists, but they won't always be the threat of terrorism that we face. In the next 10 years, I imagine we'll see a great increase in green environmental militancy, as growing numbers of people conclude that politics doesn't really work to save the planet, and we might have to do more direct action to try to stop it, industrial sabotage and so on. I can imagine that we see far more anti-technology activists, perhaps even a new wave of Luddism, as people fear the rise of artificial intelligence and what it might mean for our economy. And this is what will happen. Our government will call those people extremists and terrorists. And as a result, those people will be subject to the same kind of Prevent policy, the same kind of counter-extremism legislation that's been designed for fanatic murdering terrorists. And that is a really grave danger, that through this legislation we've built up to keep ourselves safe, we slowly but surely narrow the space that people have for original radical thinking outside of the mainstream. And that would be so detrimental to our democracies, because with the challenges that we face in the coming years, we need these original thinkers, we need these outsiders, we need the people who are willing to think differently and oppose all the things that we accept as normal. And if we count all of those people as crazy extremists, we will never change as a society, and we will never be able to face the challenges that we have coming down the line.